His adventures captivated the world. From his childhood struggles to the daring thefts, plane crashes, and an epic escapes, this is the remarkable tale of the Barefoot Bandit, the master of the woods and Kamikaze of the skies. Join us as we unravel the incredible story of a young man who dared to defy all odds and authorities, only to find redemption in the most unexpected way. Meet the Barefoot Bandit, a true modern-day legend. Once upon a time, in a quiet part of Mount Vernon, Washington, a little boy came into the world. He spent his early years on Camano Island. His mom struggled with drinking, and his dad had problems with drugs. Life at home was tough. The neighbors noticed how poorly he was treated, and even called Child Protective Services. One fateful day, during a family gathering, his dad stormed off into the woods after a big argument. He disappeared and was never seen again. The boy was only in first grade. Something seemed off about him. He didn't pay attention in school, got into fights, and sometimes broke things on purpose. Whenever he lashed out, his mean alcoholic mother would break his toys as punishment. When he was just 7, he started living in the woods. To survive, he would break into vacation homes, taking blankets, food, and water before vanishing into the forest for days. By the time he was 12, he got caught stealing for the first time, and by 13, he had 3 more convictions. The doctor said he had depression, trouble paying attention, and explosive anger issues. Every time he got caught, he spent 10 days in a detention center. Then, in 2008, the police found a neighbor's video camera in his house. He hadn't been sentenced to more than a month before, but in April 2008, he got a 3-year prison sentence. He was just 17 when he ran away from the halfway house in Renton, Washington, and he managed to stay free for more than 2 years. His story became legendary, and he became known as the Barefoot Bandit.
Search for Colton Harris Moore. Dressed in camouflage and armed with rifles, at least 2 separate agencies are looking for the teenage burglar.
In a small police station on Camano Island, Lieutenant Chris Ellis was worried. He knew that Colton being on the run meant trouble. He knew what was coming. With a heavily armed police team, Lieutenant Chris searched the area where the boy had been spotted. His name was Colton Harris Moore. Despite being only 17, Colton was a giant at 6 feet 5 inches and 200 pounds. He was incredibly clever and knew the forest better than anyone, even the authorities. He constantly outsmarted the police, leaving them frustrated and bewildered. Finding and catching this teenager was no easy task. Colton was a master of those woods. He had grown up there and knew every trail and path like the back of his hand. He was skilled at setting up hidden camps in thick bushes, making it impossible for the police to see the trails he used. He would press down the plants, set up tents or shelters, or simply use a sleeping bag. Whenever the police found one of his camps, he'd quickly move to another to stay one step ahead of them. As the police pursued him, Colton broke into Don McLean's store on Camano Island. The store had a high-tech alarm system, but he managed to disable it. So when he broke in, no alarms alerted the police. All of this trouble just to steal some junk food and a whole rack of vitamin water. Then he vanished into the woods, where he knew he wouldn't be found.
Moore is accused of breaking into dozens of homes and then disappearing into the woods of Camano Island.
Let's go back a few years before Colton went to prison. The year was 2007 when Colton crossed paths with Harley Davidson ironing outside of school. Harley was a few years older than Colton, but they quickly realized they had something in common. They both understood that breaking into places was surprisingly simple. All it took was finding an unlocked window or an open door. Their motives differed a bit. Colt had a knack for credit cards and laptops, while Harley had a one-track mind for cash. Together, they found vacation homes to be the perfect targets. These places were often empty, and folks tended to leave behind valuable stuff like money, computers, and cars. They even had a stolen 2007 Mercedes-Benz they used for their getaways. Strangely, after every job, they'd park the car in the garage in the exact same spot, wash it, and fill the tank for the owners. It was almost like they were going on a little joyride, but at least they left the car in better shape. Living life on the edge was their norm, always watching their backs, never staying in one place for too long. But then came the day when Colt got sentenced to 3 years in prison for stealing his neighbor's camera. That's when their partnership was severed, and Colt was left on his own. Coming back to present time, the residents of Camano Island began noticing some unusual charges on their credit cards. These charges included purchases from online stores, outdoor gear, bear mace, computer hacking software, GPS systems, and even explicit adult movies they'd never ordered or seen before. It was becoming increasingly clear that Colton was gearing up for another daring escapade.
Saturday morning, someone broke into a deputy's car, stealing a rifle, ammo, and a laptop. Then just yesterday, someone targeted a firefighter's truck in Fire Station. As North Bureau Chief Rob Piercy reports, people believe that someone is Colton Harris Moore.
One day, Colton decided to break into the fire station, and his target was an infrared camera. He had thought about it carefully and figured that the fire station might have an infrared camera. He wanted it to peek into houses and ensure no one was home before breaking in. The authorities knew that with an infrared camera in Colton's hands, he would be hitting even more houses. Burglaries on Camano Island skyrocketed. Deputies launched a search across the entire island, with assistance from K-9 units scouring wooded areas and patrolling familiar roads. Colton seemed to have vanished without a trace. So, where was he hiding? Well, surprisingly, he was at his own home. One morning, Colton paid a visit to his mother. She prepared a generous breakfast, including her special homemade hash browns, and they sat down to talk. After he left, the police showed up and asked if she had seen Colton. His mother replied, "Yeah, we just had breakfast together." The deputies were furious, accusing her of harboring a fugitive, but she insisted, "He's my child, and if he's hungry, I'm going to feed him." Imagine having a kid living within a mile of his mother's place, and the police still couldn't catch him. Colton had a personal vendetta against the police. He stole their shotguns and laptops just to make them look foolish. He wasn't a dangerous person, just someone who hadn't really been part of regular society. He didn't go to school. He was self-taught, even when it came to the art of stealing, which he unfortunately became quite skilled at. The police were determined to put him behind bars, and the island-wide search forced Colton to move. He preferred to operate in small towns, so he relocated to Orcas Island. It was a close-knit community, with restaurants, gift shops, grocery stores, a bank, and the Orcas hardware store. His first target there was this hardware store. Therese Lancaster, the owner of the Orcas hardware store, was devastated to find her pride and joy destroyed. Colton entered through the second-story window, climbing the fence, scaling the roof, and making his way inside through an upstairs window. Once inside, he helped himself to what he needed and then decided to tackle the safe. With large crowbars, he relentlessly hammered away until he finally broke it open, making off with over $3,000. Colton became known as the cockroach in Orcas, elusive and daring. Since Colton wasn't as well known on Orcas Island, he occasionally dined at local restaurants. On one such visit, Colton stole a credit card and used it to purchase manuals on how to fly a plane. He had these manuals delivered to the restaurant's address. Even more bizarrely, he tracked a shipment, and on the day of delivery, he broke into the restaurant at night and stole the manuals. It was almost unbelievable how he used someone's credit card to buy something, have it delivered to their workplace, and then break in to steal it. Colton eventually found a spot in the mountains and set up camp, but his true adventure was just beginning, thanks to the island's airport, which offered him a chance to turn a lifelong dream into reality.
A plane flew over and he said, "I can tell you what year that was built, who built it, and what size engine it has."
From his hidden mountain campsite, Colton put his ambitious plan into action. He became an aviation enthusiast by studying aircraft manuals and watching countless online videos. He meticulously observed the movements of the small planes that frequented Orcas Island. Then, one fateful night, he stealthily infiltrated the Orcas airport and managed to pull a Cessna flight aircraft from its hangar. Colton, a self-taught pilot without a license, soared into the dark, starry sky, finally realizing his lifelong dream of flying. It was a moment of exhilaration, but it would soon take a dramatic and unexpected turn. High above the island, Colton lost control of the plane, and it crash-landed deep in the woods. Miraculously, he survived the crash, emerging from the wreckage unscathed. The authorities were initially puzzled, suspecting the plane had been stolen by drug runners, completely unaware that this would eventually transform Colton into a legend. He vanished into the wilderness, escaping unnoticed for the time being. However, Colton's crime spree on Orcas Island did not go unnoticed for long. His actions began to draw more and more attention. The island's residents, law enforcement, and even the media started to piece together the puzzle of the mysterious and elusive thief who had seemingly vanished into thin air after the airplane incident. Little did they know that this was just the beginning of Colton's adventures and the notoriety that would come to surround him.
This teenage burglar from Camano Island may be island hopping.
Authorities believe Colton Harris Moore is connected to several burglaries on Orcas Island.
Despite the ordeal of his first flying adventure, Colton's remained determined. He couldn't resist the charm of flying, so he did what he knew best. He stole another light aircraft and took off into the open air once more. This time, Colton managed to keep control of the plane while soaring through the heavens. He knew he needed to bring the plane back to the same airstrip from where he had taken it to avoid drawing too much attention. But as he attempted to land, things didn't go as smoothly as he had hoped. The landing was so rough that he ended up breaking the plane's landing gear. Unlike his previous exploits with stolen vehicles, where he'd returned them in pristine condition with a full tank of gas, this time the plane's owner would soon discover that someone had taken their aircraft on an unauthorized joyride. Colton had once again pushed the boundaries of his audacious escapades, leaving behind evidence of his adventures in the sky.
Here's where this story makes a turn for the almost ridiculous. In addition to all those burglaries, Colton Harris Moore is suspected of stealing as many as 2 airplanes. Airplanes! Where did he learn how to fly?
Reporters started to catch wind of the name Colton Harris Moore as a young suspect linked to the string of burglaries. Even if it had been an adult involved, it would have been newsworthy on its own, given the sheer number of burglaries. However, the fact that a kid was behind these crimes took the story to a whole new level of attention. Word spread like wildfire, and by the end of the day, every major TV station in Seattle had dispatched their reporters to Orcas Island.
Colton Harris Moore may have taught himself how to fly.
The suspect may be island hopping with stolen boats and planes.
Law enforcement officers have referred to Colton Harris Moore as a ghost with an uncanny ability to run from the law.
Colton wanted his friends to experience the thrill of flying. He wanted to take them with him on a plane ride, but obviously none of them wanted to. One day, he took a stolen black BMW to meet his friend Josh Richardson. They cruised around in the stolen car while Colton carried a backpack filled with cash. Colton wanted to ease him into flying with him. After the joyride, their next stop was an airport in Maple Ridge, where a couple of hangars nearby housed planes. Colton had hoped that Josh would change his mind and fly with him. But Josh continued to make excuses, clearly doubting Colton's flying skills. Unfazed, Colton decided to leave Josh behind and embark on a solo flight. He took off from Maple Ridge Airport on Orcas Island and covered nearly 100 miles, eventually landing in an open, unpaved field in Granite Falls, Washington. What was truly remarkable was his precision during the landing. Despite the challenging terrain, Colton's touchdown resembled that of a seasoned pilot. A logger stumbled upon the wreckage and immediately alerted the authorities. This triggered a rapid and massive response from law enforcement, including sheriff's deputies, state patrol officers, border patrol agents, and Homeland Security personnel. They descended on the scene with SWAT teams, dogs, guns, and rifles, creating an almost absurdly intense atmosphere. Despite their extensive search efforts, there was still no sign of Colton in Granite Falls. Meanwhile, Sheila Grayer, a resident of Granite Falls, had just returned home. Upon inspecting her house, she noticed missing food and her passport had vanished. Fearing an intruder, she called 911 and turned off all the lights in her home, waiting outside in silence. When the responding officer arrived, he followed suit by turning off his car, plunging the area into eerie quiet. Then they heard a sound. Sheila confirmed that it had come from inside her house. The officers quietly geared up and began moving toward the source of the noise. As they approached the house, the intruder was startled and had no time to grab anything before fleeing. He left behind everything he had with him, including a business-sized vinyl zipper deposit bag stuffed with a substantial sum of money, over $20,000. The elusive Colton Harris Moore had narrowly escaped capture once again, leaving law enforcement and the community on edge, wondering when and where he would surface next.
If he flew planes, I'm proud.
How come?
Because he would have had to teach himself. Kids do what they want to do. It isn't the parents' fault.
Is it the parents' job, though, to steer them in a different direction?
Sure.
If they start going off?
But not all kids can be steered.
I called his mother and said, what are you gonna, if you could give him a Christmas present, what would you give him? And she told me she would give him a bulletproof vest.
SWAT teams fanned out across Granite Falls, launching an extensive search effort that covered both the ground and the sky. They deployed a Homeland Security Black Hawk helicopter equipped with cutting-edge human tracking technology, hoping to pick up any trace of the Colton. Despite their best efforts and resources, the search yielded nothing. Authorities were determined to avoid linking the name Colton Harris Moore to these incidents, fearing that he might become some kind of folk hero. However, despite their attempts to keep him under wraps, Colton became an internet sensation. His moniker, the Barefoot Bandit, started trending online, and people around the world were captivated by the daring young thief who seemed to defy all odds.
Airplanes. He stole 3 airplanes.
No, you... And the theft of at least 3 airplanes.
How do you steal an airplane?
He's taught himself to fly because he didn't have any training or anything. And he's been on the run for like 2 years from the FBI and the cops.
A San Juan County Sheriff's deputy said he nearly caught Harris Moore in the woods and had him in his flashlight, and then he virtually vaporized in front of me. He recalled Colton laughing loudly from the woods when he realized he had eluded them.
With law enforcement hot on his heels, Colton returned to Orcas Island from Granite Falls. He once again stole a plane and performed a hard landing back on Orcas Island. By this point, the authorities were well aware of the telltale signs of a hard-landed light aircraft. Colton had come full circle. It didn't take long for his spree of burglaries to resume. Colton's bravado knew no bounds. He broke into a grocery store, where he not only committed theft, but just to push the envelope further, he took the time to draw footprints on the floor with chalk, leaving behind his signature mark. Colton was playing a dangerous game with the police, but this time, law enforcement had a trick up their sleeve. They had discovered his hideout in a plane hangar. The police decided that the only way to catch him was through covert action. Rather than swarming the hangar with marked police cars, they patiently waited, watching him closely. They also learned Colton would visit the same plane owner's house, using the owner's truck parked in the hangar to get there. He would go there to make phone calls, and this presented an opportunity for the police. They set up a trap at the plane owner's house and patiently waited for Colton. Like clockwork, he arrived at the house, opened the door, and was met with a SWAT team ready to apprehend him. But Colton's instincts kicked in, and he made a break for it. He sprinted so quickly that even a large SWAT team couldn't catch up to him. He vanished into the dense woods of Camano Island, and by now, the police knew that pursuing him on foot in the woods was an almost impossible task. The barefoot bandit had once again eluded capture.
Barefoot bandit Colton Harris Moore.
We're talking about the FBI and several local police agencies all converging in to try to corner this teenager. But after 2.5 years on the run, authorities may finally have Colton Harris Moore right where they were.
Colton's journey took him on a cross-country odyssey, leaving a trail of stolen cars in his wake. He would drive each stolen vehicle until it ran out of gas, all the while breaking into approximately half a dozen airports, all in search of the perfect aircraft. Over a span of more than 2,000 miles, across 9 states, and with nearly a dozen stolen cars, Colton finally stumbled upon the plane he had been searching for in Bloomington, Indiana. Colton stole the plane in Bloomington, and this marked his longest flight yet. He soared 1,200 miles south until he reached Abaco Island in the Bahamas.
Investigators say a stolen plane from Indiana crash-landed off the coast of one of the islands yesterday.
The FBI's got agents down in the Bahamas working with local police there to try and catch Harris Moore.
There's now a $10,000 reward for information that leads to his arrest.
The authorities had followed Colton all the way to the Bahamas, but were left baffled by his elusive escape. They considered the possibility that it wasn't Colton who had crash-landed the plane on Abaco Island, suggesting that perhaps a copycat was at play. Frustrated and out of leads, the search was eventually called off. Without the thrill of being chased, Colton grew bored and made a surprising choice. He decided to let the authorities know where he was. Maybe he simply felt the need to write the final chapter of his own story. He came out of the hiding and stole a 13-foot boat and approached Willard Johnson, a resident of Harbor Island, near the dock. Colton identified himself as the barefoot bandit, Colton Harris Moore, fully aware of the substantial reward for his capture. Willard acted if these names meant nothing to him. Colton dared him to call the authorities, the Coast Guard, or even the FBI. He wanted to be chased because he was bored. Willard, however, made a different call. He contacted Jamal Brown, one of the best boat captains on Harbor Island. Jamal gathered a crew of 12 strong and raced to the dock. He saw a small skiff with a white boy in it, wearing a smile, and he sped away. Jamal pursued him up and down the harbor, marveling at the remarkable maneuvers Colton executed with expert skill. Although Jamal had been driving boats for nearly his entire life, this kid displayed impressive talents. Colton got the adrenaline rush he had been seeking, and he finally docked his boat. Jamal and his crew followed him to the dock, causing a commotion that alerted everyone in the vicinity that the barefoot bandit is here. The police were summoned, and Chief Inspector Moss quickly mobilized his forces, launching a search operation. Colton realized that he had to make a swift exit to evade capture. He made a run back to the dock, stole another boat, and made a hasty getaway, leaving the police in hot pursuit once again. As Colton sped away, he was determined to keep one step ahead of the authorities. Ron Billot, a boat captain from Harbor Island, had been closely monitoring the dramatic events unfolding at the dock. Realizing that his crew were only ones available to assist, they made a quick decision to jump in and lend a hand to the police. They quickly got the officers on their boat and set off in hot pursuit of Colton. Colton was pushing his stolen boat to its limits, racing at full throttle to escape capture. However, just as suddenly as he had sped away, his boat came to an abrupt stop. Being a local proved invaluable, Ron knew the marina far better than Colton did. Colton had unwittingly driven his boat into the shallowest part of the marina. His boat was stuck in the sand. He was trapped, with no way to escape. Ron approached him, and the police officers on board began ordering Colton to cut the engines. To their surprise, Colton pulled a gun and pointed it on his own temple. Nobody wanted Colton dead, but at the same time, nobody wanted him to slip away once more. As they watched, they noticed Colton's boat was breaking free from the sand. Without hesitation, the police officers made a difficult decision. They opened fire at his engine, rendering them useless. Colton immediately dropped his gun and raised his hands in surrender. The barefoot bandit, who had managed to elude capture for so long, was finally arrested.
They got him. The Royal Bahamian Police Force did what no U.S. cops could. They ended the run of the Barefoot Bandit.
Hey Colton, how you doing? How you treating you, buddy?
On December 16, 2011, Colton Moore received his sentence, 7 years in prison. During his time behind bars, Colton displayed genuine remorse for his past crimes and wanted to turn his life around. He made it clear that he intended to use his time in prison to earn a degree in aeronautical engineering. In July 2016, after serving a portion of his sentence, Colton was released on probation to a halfway house near Seattle. He sought employment and found a position at his defense attorney's law firm in Seattle, where he took on low-level clerical work. Colton also attempted to raise money for flight school training through social media, but his efforts were blocked by his parole officer, who insisted that any funds raised should be directed toward the $129,000 in restitution owed to his victims. Today, Colton Harris Moore lives in the greater Seattle area, where he has embarked on a new chapter in his life. He works as a real estate consultant, specializing in commercial properties, demonstrating a commitment to his rehabilitation and a desire to contribute positively to society. His story is a testament to the potential for redemption, even after a notorious past as the Barefoot Bandit. This is just one of many stories waiting to be uncovered. Subscribe now so you don't miss out on our upcoming videos, and please like the video if you enjoyed it. Goodbye. Until the next crime.